In today's episode of the Let's Talk Psychology podcast, we're diving deep into a topic that hits close to home for many people. Why so many gifted children grow up to feel lonely, unmotivated, and emotionally disconnected as adults. If you've ever felt like you were meant for more but somehow lost your way, this episode might just give you the clarity you didn't know you needed. Let's start with the paradox. Children who are labeled gifted or high potential often grow up hearing how bright they are, how much potential they hold, and how far they're going to go in life. Teachers celebrate them, parents beam with pride, peers admire or envy them. It all sounds like a blessing. But for a surprising number of those kids, that early praise eventually starts to feel more like a burden than a gift. As adults, they find themselves stuck in a kind of invisible limbo. Intelligent, sure, but isolated. Capable, yet chronically unmotivated. Outwardly successful, but inwardly disconnected. Struggling to truly engage with life or the people around them. Why does this happen? Why do so many intelligent children grow into adults who feel like they're drifting through life, unable to anchor themselves in meaningful experiences or relationships? It all comes down to how identity forms in childhood and how it calcifies over time. You see, when we're little, identity is relatively simple. Kids attach themselves to traits or interests in a very straightforward way. One kid is the dinosaur kid, another is obsessed with astronauts, someone else insists on only wearing red. These identities are innocent and evolving. But when a child gets tagged as the smart one, that label has a very different weight to it. It's not just a passing phase, it becomes a blueprint. That label gets reinforced over and over. The child solves a math problem quickly. Wow, you're so smart. They ace a spelling test without studying. You're a genius. Adults love rewarding what they see as natural talent. And while that encouragement seems positive on the surface, it begins to cement a belief that can later become damaging. The idea that being smart means things should always come easily. And here's where the trap begins. When praise is constantly tied to ease and effortlessness, children internalize the belief that difficulty is a sign of failure. If they're truly smart, they reason, they shouldn't need to try hard. So when they eventually face something challenging, and they inevitably will, it feels like more than just a tough problem. It feels like a threat to their identity. If I can't do this easily, does that mean I'm not really smart after all? That kind of thinking breeds avoidance. Instead of leaning into challenges, these kids start pulling away from them. They avoid raising their hands unless they're 100% certain of the answer. They pass on activities where they might not immediately excel. They steer clear of anything that might expose them as fallible or ordinary. So their world gets smaller. And while their peers are experimenting, failing, growing, and building resilience through trial and error, these gifted kids are quietly curating a narrow, safe version of themselves. They stick to what they know. They avoid risk. They prioritize looking smart over learning. It's not about curiosity anymore. It's about preservation. Over time, that carefully curated image of being the smart one becomes a prison. And once you've tied your self-worth to being the person who always gets it right, you can't afford to get it wrong, which means you stop trying new things entirely. You're not playing to win anymore. You're playing not to lose. And as that fear-driven caution sets in, another problem emerges: social isolation. Social connection, especially in our formative years, thrives on shared experience. Think about how friendships are often born. Doing a project together, playing the same game, going through a weird phase together, stumbling through awkward moments side by side. These are the messy human experiences that create bonds. But if you're opting out of those moments because you don't want to risk looking foolish or unprepared, you're also opting out of connection. You don't go to the party because you're afraid of small talk. You don't join the club because you don't want to be the beginner. You don't try out for the play because you've never acted before, and what if you're terrible? You start to exist on the sidelines of life. And here's the cruel irony. You still crave connection. You still want to belong. You still long for friendship and intimacy and the comfort of being understood. But now, instead of entering relationships organically, you try to think your way into them. You observe people like puzzles. You analyze social interactions like equations. You try to understand people through logic instead of vulnerability. This is what psychologists call cognitive empathy, the ability to intellectually grasp what someone else is feeling. It's helpful, sure. It lets you participate in conversations, read the room, even offer advice. But it's not the same as emotional empathy. It's not the same as actually feeling with someone. And without that emotional resonance, relationships can start to feel performative. You're not connecting. You're acting. And acting is exhausting. When your social interactions are driven by analysis instead of presence, you're constantly managing your image, trying to stay ahead of judgment, rehearsing responses in your mind, calculating what version of yourself to present. It becomes a performance. And the moment you slip up or say the wrong thing, you spiral. Because failure, any kind of failure, still feels like an existential threat. Eventually, that performance gets so draining that you just start avoiding people altogether. Loneliness deepens. But here's the kicker. You still believe you should be able to fix it. You're smart, after all. Shouldn't you be able to figure out your own emotional pain? So you try. You try to logic your way through it. You write journal entries like arguments. You dissect your behavior like a case study. You tell yourself you're fine, statistically, logically, reasonably fine. But nothing changes, because intelligence, for all its power, can't heal the heart. It can't provide the emotional nourishment we all need to feel connected, accepted, and loved. You can't solve "Am I enough?" with a spreadsheet or a thesis. That's a question that lives in the emotional realm. And if you've neglected your emotional growth, because it was never rewarded the way your intellect was, you might not even know where to begin. So, your mind does what it's good at. It builds defenses. One of the most common? The belief that I'm just different. You convince yourself that other people are shallow or simple or not operating on your level. You start to feel superior, not out of arrogance, but out of self-preservation. It's easier to believe you're above connection than to admit you feel unworthy of it. This kind of protective self-image is called defensive arrogance, and it's one of the loneliest places a person can live. Because now, even when you want connection, you've convinced yourself it's unavailable. You've built a wall, and you're the one who has to tear it down, but only if you're willing to admit it's there in the first place. So how do you begin to change? The first step is non-negotiable. You have to let go of the identity you built around being the smart one. Not because intelligence is bad, not at all, but because clinging to it as the source of your worth is unsustainable. When your entire value system is built on being exceptional, you become terrified of anything that suggests you're ordinary. So you stop taking risks. You stop growing. What you need is a new foundation. One based not on being effortlessly brilliant, but on being willing to grow, to evolve, and yes, to fail. That's the real sign of maturity. Not perfection, but progress. This shift means redefining success. It's no longer about getting it right on the first try. It's about showing up and trying in the first place. It's about allowing yourself to be a beginner, to be clumsy, to not have all the answers, to participate without the pressure to perform. And it's uncomfortable. At first, it might feel like everything you feared, messy, awkward, humbling. But that discomfort? That's growth. That's life. That's where the real transformation happens. It's in those imperfect moments, when you're not dazzling anyone, that you start to become whole again. The identity of the smart kid taught you that your value was in being exceptional. But the truth is, your worth has never depended on your intelligence. It's always been in your humanness, your capacity to care, to try, to connect, to stumble, and get back up. You are allowed to be lost. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to be unsure. That doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. And being human is the only identity you'll ever need to truly belong. So now that we've begun breaking down the identity built around being the smart one, we step into the real work. The messy, vulnerable, very human process of building a life that isn't driven by fear of inadequacy, but guided by curiosity, courage, and connection. Let's talk about what that looks like in practice. First, you need to retrain the way you respond to failure, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Because if you're someone who spent most of their life equating difficulty with deficiency, even the smallest setbacks can feel like personal attacks. A missed deadline becomes a referendum on your worth. A conversation that didn't go well spirals into days of overthinking. You start to fear not just the failure itself, but the feelings that come with it. Shame, disappointment, vulnerability. But here's the truth. No one tells us when we're young and praised for our brilliance. Failure isn't evidence that you're not smart. It's proof that you're growing, that you're engaging with life instead of hiding from it. The people who thrive in the long run aren't the ones who coast on raw talent. They're the ones who learn to face discomfort and keep moving anyway. So you start to shift the question. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid failing?" you start asking, "How can I become more resilient?" You begin approaching challenges like a learner instead of a performer. You say, "I don't know how to do this yet," instead of, "I can't let anyone see me struggle." That one small word, yet, is a revolution. It's an opening. It's a declaration that your worth is not fixed, and your life doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. And here's another thing no one prepares you for. Growth feels like grief. Because when you let go of the identity you've been clinging to for years, whether it's the gifted kid, the overachiever, the quiet genius, the one who had so much potential, you have to face the emptiness underneath. You have to reckon with the parts of yourself that you ignored in favor of competence and image. It's painful. It's disorienting. But it's also a sign that you're finally coming home to yourself. You begin to rediscover things you used to love, not because you were good at them, but because they brought you joy. You reconnect with play, creativity, and silliness. You stop trying to optimize every part of your life and start experiencing it. You take up painting even if your art looks like a child's. You join a hiking group even if you don't know anyone there. You let yourself be a beginner, awkward, unsure, alive, and something beautiful happens when you do. You start building relationships not from a place of performance, but from presence. You no longer feel the need to impress or explain yourself. You don't have to lead with your accomplishments. You stop asking, "Do they think I'm smart enough?" and start wondering, "Can I be real with them?" You discover that the most meaningful connections don't come from dazzling people with your intellect. They come from the quiet courage of showing up as you are, flaws and all. Now, this doesn't mean you abandon your intelligence. Your mind is still a beautiful, powerful instrument. But you start to see it as just one part of who you are, not the whole picture. You start building an identity that includes emotional depth, relational strength, spiritual curiosity, physical presence. You become multidimensional, a full-spectrum human being. Let's pause here for a moment. There's a concept in psychology called self-complexity. It's the idea that the more diverse your sense of self is, the more different roles, interests, and qualities you identify with, the more resilient you become. So when one area of your life hits a rough patch, it doesn't destroy your entire sense of identity. But when you've only ever been the smart one, any challenge to your intellect feels like an existential threat. That's why it hurts so much. That's why you spiral. You've built your whole house on a single support beam, so widening your identity by embracing new experiences, nurturing new relationships, cultivating emotional intelligence isn't just nice, it's essential. It gives you more ways to weather life's storms. It gives you space to breathe. And as you breathe, you begin to notice something. The world becomes less threatening. Other people feel less like judges and more like potential friends. You don't need to read the room with military precision. You don't need to have the perfect response ready at all times. You can say, "I don't know." You can say, "That hurt." You can say, "I need help." And the sky doesn't fall. You're no longer living in a fortress of thought. You're out in the open, where things are uncertain, but real. And for maybe the first time in years, you feel connected. Now let's talk about healing some of the deeper wounds, because for many former gifted kids, adulthood brings a strange mourning, the loss of that bright, promising future that never quite materialized the way people said it would. You were told you were exceptional. You believed your life would be too. And if your adult life feels ordinary, that contrast can sting like failure. But here's the twist. Ordinary is not a failure. Ordinary is freedom. Ordinary is where the good stuff happens. You don't have to save the world to be worthy of love. You don't need to make $1 million or win a Nobel Prize to matter. You can be someone who wakes up, makes breakfast, texts a friend, takes a walk, laughs at a dumb meme, and still be a person of immense value. Your worth is not something you earn by being extraordinary. It's something you inherit by being alive. And the more you let yourself believe that, the more open your life becomes. You start making decisions based on what nourishes you instead of what impresses others. You take breaks without guilt. You say no without shame. You stop trying to be a machine. You let yourself be soft. You let yourself rest. Eventually, you realize something quietly radical. You no longer need to be exceptional to be okay. And when you let go of that pressure, something else shows up in its place. Joy. The real kind. Not the kind you get from achievement or validation, but the kind that bubbles up unexpectedly when you're present, engaged, and honest with yourself. You laugh more. You cry more. You let moments touch you. You start seeing people not as threats to your image, but as fellow travelers, each stumbling their way through the dark just like you. And you'll still be smart. But now, your intelligence serves you rather than the other way around. It becomes a tool for creating, for contributing, for understanding, not a mask to hide behind. So if you've made it this far, if you've recognized yourself in this story, felt the weight of these patterns in your own life, or sensed that quiet click of truth somewhere inside you, know this: you're not broken. You never were. You were just doing your best to survive in a world that taught you your worth was conditional. And now you're learning something better. You're learning that being human is more valuable than being perfect. That connection is worth the risk of vulnerability. That joy is found in presence, not performance. And if you're ready to take the first steps toward this new way of being, here's where to begin. Do one thing today that's just for the experience, not for success, not for achievement, not for validation. Just because it feels good. Take a walk without your phone. Doodle in a notebook. Reach out to someone you care about. Say something imperfect, let yourself be seen, and then do it again tomorrow. And again the next day. You're not going to transform overnight. You don't need to. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the pressure to be extraordinary took over. That curious, messy, loving, creative kid is still in there. They're just waiting for permission to come out and play. So give yourself that permission. Be bold enough to be average. Be brave enough to be open. Be wise enough to grow. And let the world meet the real you. Not the image, not the performance, not the curated highlight reel, but the beautifully imperfect human who's learning, slowly but surely, that they belong not because of their brilliance, but because of their being. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If anything in this episode resonated with you, if you felt seen or understood, or even just a little bit less alone, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, share your story, or send this to someone who might need it. This has been the Let's Talk Psychology podcast. Take care of your mind, be kind to yourself, and we'll see you in the next episode.